Person is saying that they were able to remote view Antarctica and detailed what they saw there. And before I get into today's story, it's disclaimer time. This is Spooky Scary Story Time, the series of allegedly true listener-submitted stories about the creepiest and most unsettling experiences that people have ever had. And I can't prove the validity of any of these stories, so this series should be treated as entertainment only. Take this with a grain of salt. I am in no way, shape, or form saying that this is absolutely true. I'm just going to read you what this person sent. I'm just sharing this because I thought it was interesting. And someone had left a comment recently asking if I had any Antarctica stories, and I searched my inbox, and this is the one story that I have involving Antarctica because we can't go there. You can go to certain parts, of course, on tours and on cruises, but there was an Antarctic treaty that was signed in 1959, which is an international agreement that states that Antarctica is a demilitarized scientific preserve. All of that said, I'm going to read you this email that was sent in to me. I will say also that this person sent this through a burner email through the form on my website, which basically means that I couldn't email them back to ask questions even if I wanted to, and they also used a very evidently fake name, so make of this what you will. But he said, this is shared strictly for storytelling purposes, and I'm not trying to prove anything, but I think the experience is worth telling exactly as I remember it and use it however you'd like. I was trained to remote view. I'm going to leave out a lot of identifying details because whether people believe remote viewing is real or not, the people who trained me took confidentiality very seriously. I signed paperwork that technically still applies, even though the program I was involved with no longer exists in the same form. There are still people doing what I did, but they are operating under very different terms. First off, I was not recruited because I was a psychic. It was actually the opposite. I have a skill set that seems unrelated on the surface, but as it turns out, is very conducive to the ability to remote view. I'm sorry I can't go more into detail about that. When I was first recruited, we were taught that remote viewing was not supposed to be mystical like many people think. It was described as a skill, one that almost anyone can develop through disciplined training. We spent months learning how to separate imagination from actual impressions. Every session followed very strict protocols. You wrote down raw sensory data before your brain had a chance to build a story around it. Many sessions were incredibly boring. We were tested on whether we could accurately depict what was at certain coordinates, like buildings or objects or other landmarks. When I first started, sometimes I'd get enough correct that it was unsettling. Other times I'd be completely wrong. There was one target that everyone whispered about. As implied in the subject line of this message, that target was Antarctica. It didn't really start as an official assignment, which is actually what made it feel different. It happened during my 6th month of training. A senior instructor, I'll call Mr. E, was running a debrief after a day of practice targets. Most of us were already exhausted and ready to head out when someone asked a question about the weirdest target anyone had ever been given. Mr. E then told us a story about a prior viewer he had instructed who had an exceptional track record, who had been given random test coordinates pulled from a database. The viewer was not given context, just latitude and longitude, but said that the session had been so anomalous that the program began spot checking the same coordinates with other viewers over the following months. Mr. E finished by saying, "We don't assign that target anymore, but when it does come up, we don't discuss the results with the viewers." The room was completely silent. He never told us what the target was, but of course when we left, we all talked quietly to ourselves when one guy I trained with said, "I bet it was Antarctica." That made the most sense because there was no other place that they would not discuss. Of course, there was no way of knowing for sure until a few months later when I was assigned the coordinates. I didn't know where I was at first. The first thing I wrote down was old metal. I didn't know exactly what I was looking at, besides a lot of old metal that was massive and buried. There was no snow or ice. Then came geometric shapes that did not feel natural, like angles and long corridors descending deeper than I could comfortably estimate. It felt less like walking into a cave and more like standing inside something that had been intentionally constructed. Then something I still struggled to explain. I kept seeing what I can only describe as enormous gates built into the ground itself. They weren't standing upright like the entrance to something, but were flush with the surface, almost as if they had been sealed beneath the ice long ago. There was at least one set of circular gates and several sets of rectangular gates. They were definitely engineered, but I wasn't sure if they were meant to keep something out or to keep something in. Every time my attention drifted toward them, I got the overwhelming impression that they were not meant to be opened again. Around the same time, another image kept forcing itself into the session. A wall of ice that stretched farther than I could perceive in either direction that was unnaturally continuous. The only thing I can think to lighten it to, I think he meant liken it to, is the Great Wall of China. It just went on forever. My notes from that day literally say, "Boundary beyond this I can't see." I don't know whether it was an actual physical ice wall, my mind interpreting the edge of the target area, or some kind of mental block. In remote viewing, we're taught not to assign meaning to impressions while they're happening, but it stood out enough that I circled it 3 times in my notebook. The emotional impression was the strangest part. Every remote viewing session teaches you to separate physical descriptions from emotional overlay. The emotion attached to this place was a warning. It felt like, though I wasn't physically there, I was standing somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I felt eyes on me, and it was the first time in all of my sessions that I did not feel alone. I couldn't see anyone else, but there was another presence which led me to believe that there were other assigned viewers in this space. I saw enormous doorways that looked too large for people and circular structures beneath layers of ice. I saw machinery that didn't seem powered on anymore, but also did not feel obsolete. Afterward, during debriefing, I expected the instructor to tell me I'd missed the target completely. Instead, he looked at my notes and sketches for a long time before sliding them into a folder and put it in his desk. He asked only one question. "Did you perceive anything living?" I said no. He nodded like he was relieved. We did not debrief, which is why I feel that my session was related to the location he had told us about months prior. In every other session, we were given marks on accuracy and told where and what we viewed. Others I trained with were given the same coordinates in different sessions, and we discussed among ourselves what we saw. None of us know for sure where we went or what we looked at, but we all saw similar things with what feels like remarkable consistency. Years later, I started reading about Admiral Byrd, Operation High Jump, satellite images, strange heat signatures beneath Antarctica, and stories about subglacial structures. Most of it is probably internet mythology, but I feel I've seen some of the things that have been discussed. It could also be my own mind being influenced to think that way. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that every time Antarctica came up in training, instructors became very careful with their words. When another instructor was asked about it, he simply said, "We don't train there." And after my session, I was never assigned those coordinates again. I'm sharing this now, years later, because something has been sitting on me heavier lately. I've watched the slow trickle of declassified documents, the growing number of scientists quietly admitting that there are vast subglacial lakes and unexpected geothermal anomalies under the ice, and the occasional blurry satellite image that makes even skeptics pause. I've also heard people discuss things that sound eerily similar to what I wrote and sketched in that notebook. Also, for what it's worth, I don't claim to have any proof, and I am not here to convince anyone that ancient structures or sealed gates lie beneath Antarctica. Most days, I still only half believe that what I saw was nothing more than disciplined imagination meeting suggestion, but the warning I felt did not feel invented, and that is the part that stays with me most. I'm sharing it because if even a fraction of what I perceived was real, then the decision to keep digging, and then he put in parentheses, literally and figuratively, might matter more than what we understand. And if it was all just my own mind playing tricks under strict protocol, then maybe it's still a useful reminder of how easily we can convince ourselves that we've seen the edge of the map. Either way, the impression hasn't faded. Whatever is there is keeping a secret. I don't know, y'all. I don't know. That was it. Let me know what you all think, and if you have a topic that you would like me to cover in a future episode of Spooky Scary Storytime, drop it below, and I will check my inbox.